Liam Neeson stayed silent for years. He never spoke publicly about the night he lost his wife, but at that event, in front of strangers, he stepped onto the stage with a letter in his pocket. A letter written on the day he turned off the machines. Words that no one, not even his children, not even his friends, had ever heard. And when he finished reading, the entire room stood, not to applaud, but because no one could hold back the tears. Watch until the end. You'll understand why this was the most vulnerable and most truthful moment of Liam Neeson's life. It had been years since anyone asked him to speak publicly about her. Not on camera, not in interviews, not even behind closed doors. The requests had come and gone, quietly declined through polite emails or silences too heavy to follow up on. People had stopped trying, but this time, something was different. It wasn't Hollywood. It wasn't a magazine or a late-night show. It was a letter, handwritten on soft paper with ink that looked like it came from an older time. The invitation was simple, an evening of remembrance for those who had lost someone suddenly. No cameras, no press, just stories, just pain, just people trying to make sense of what can't be understood. He almost threw it away, and yet here he was. Liam Neeson stood in the hallway behind the stage, his fingers tightening around the folded paper inside his jacket. The paper wasn't the invitation. It was something older, something heavier. A letter he had written years ago but never read out loud. A letter he placed beside her, tucked under her hand, before they wheeled her body away. He had never meant to show it to anyone. That night was supposed to remain sealed. But silence has weight. And after enough years, it presses against the ribs like a stone too large to breathe around. The event hall was small, modest, just a few rows of chairs, a single microphone on a plain black stage, a screen in the background quietly cycling through the names and faces of those who had been lost too soon. And there she was, her face, smiling, frozen in time, flickering across the screen with the others. Natasha. He hadn't said her name in public in almost a decade. It wasn't that he had forgotten it, he just didn't trust the sound of it leaving his mouth without breaking something inside. The moment the image disappeared, the host stepped onto the stage and gently introduced the next speaker. Him. The applause was soft, uncertain. Not for the actor, for the man, the widower, the one everyone remembered but few truly knew. He didn't move, not at first. His feet felt rooted to the wooden floor beneath him, like the grain of the stage had swallowed him whole, refusing to release him into the light. His pulse was quiet, but fast. His hands, steady to the world, trembled inside his coat pocket. The letter was still there. He could feel the edges. He thought of turning back, of stepping away and never speaking of it again. After all, what did one more story matter in a sea of heartbreak? But then he remembered the promise, the one they made to each other, years before the accident, long before the tragedy. If one of them were ever in a coma with no hope of return, the other would let them go. Not because they wanted to, but because they must. He had kept that promise, and it had destroyed him. Still, he walked, one step at a time, past the curtains into the soft glow of the spotlight. No music, no fanfare, just silence, and then breath. He stood at the microphone and looked out over the faces in the audience, strangers, friends, parents who had lost children, children who had lost parents, spouses holding hands with empty fingers. Grief, recognized grief. It didn't matter who he was in films. It mattered who he had been in that hospital room, on that night, facing a decision no human should ever have to make. He took a breath, pulled the letter from his coat, and held it in both hands. The paper had faded slightly. The folds were worn, but the words hadn't aged a day. He didn't read it, not yet. Instead, he began to speak, Not the way actors speak when they know the camera is rolling, but the way someone speaks when the only thing they're trying to hold on to is what they lost. He told them about the call, how it didn't sound urgent at first, just a fall on a ski slope. No need to worry, they said, just a precaution. She'd be fine. But then the second call came, the one that changed everything. He told them how he rushed to the hospital, not prepared for what he would see. Her body warm, her face still peaceful, her heartbeat strong, but no one behind her eyes. She was gone. The machines were just pretending, and he had to decide. He talked about sitting by her bedside, about whispering things he never said when she was awake, about the ring she still wore, about their boys who were too young to understand why their mother's hands wouldn't move anymore. And then he said something no one expected. He said he wrote her a letter that night, not for closure, for courage. He opened the paper. The room shifted. No one moved. And then he began to read. You said you wanted to grow old with me. We were supposed to watch our boys become men together. I don't know how to walk through this world without hearing your laugh echo down the hall. But I'll keep going, not because I'm strong, but because you were. I'll carry the pieces of us in everything I do until we meet again. There was no applause, no tears wiped away, just stillness. Because every person in that room had heard something in those words that belonged to them too. He folded the letter slowly and pressed it to his chest. For a moment it looked like he might end there, like that would be enough. And it could have been. But it wasn't. Because even after all these years, there was one thing he had never said. Not to her, not to the world, not even to himself. And now, the words were burning in his throat. And just as he stepped back from the microphone, voice shaking but still standing, he whispered, "But there's something I never told her, and I need to say it now." The audience leaned forward. No one blinked. And Liam Neeson, standing alone under the weight of memory, unfolded a second piece of paper, one that no one had ever seen before. The second sheet of paper wasn't folded like the first. It wasn't worn at the edges or softened by the oils of his hands. It had never been tucked into a hospital bed. It had never left the drawer where he placed it the night he wrote it. Because he hadn't meant to share it. He hadn't even meant to write it. But grief does strange things. It doesn't knock. It invades. It pulls words out of you at 2 a.m. when you're surrounded by silence so heavy it feels like a second gravity. That's when this letter had come to life, in a hotel room, alone, just days after the funeral. She was already gone. The world had moved on. But he hadn't, not even close. So he wrote, and then he locked it away. And now, somehow, impossibly, he was standing in front of a room full of strangers with that same letter in his hands, shaking in a way his voice never had on screen. He didn't apologize for what was coming. He didn't explain. He simply breathed and began to read. I never told you this, but I always thought I'd go first. Maybe it was the films, the stunts, the long flights. The way you used to shake your head and say, "One of these days," with that soft half smile like you knew something I didn't. But it wasn't me. It was you. And I still can't make sense of that. You weren't supposed to go skiing that day. You almost cancelled. You texted me that morning, remember? Said the weather looked strange, that you'd stay back and read instead. But you didn't. You went. And then you were gone. Everyone said it was fast, that you didn't feel it, that it was over before you ever knew. I clung to those words like lifelines, but they didn't stop the dreams, the ones where I get there sooner, the ones where you turn your head when I say your name, the ones where we leave the hospital together. I hate that hallway, the one outside your room. I hate how cold it was. I hate that I had to sign my name under a decision that should never belong to a husband. I hate that the nurse touched my shoulder like I was supposed to feel peace in that moment. There was no peace. The boys ask about you. They always will. I tell them what you'd want me to, that you were brave, that you laughed loudly, that you danced when no one was watching and especially when everyone was. I tell them about your stubbornness, your warmth, your French accent when you were angry. I tell them about your last birthday, your last Christmas, your last everything. But I don't tell them that I still whisper to you when they're asleep. I don't tell them that sometimes I sit in the closet with your sweater just to remember the way your perfume faded with time. I don't tell them I talk to your picture before I leave the house. They say the world keeps spinning, that grief dulls, that time makes things easier, but that's not true. It just makes the silence heavier. It just teaches you to carry it without collapsing in public. I've gotten good at that. You'd be proud. I know I did the right thing. I know I kept my promise, but I need to say it now, even if it's too late. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't there in time. I'm sorry I let them take you away before I said everything. I'm sorry I ever thought I had more tomorrows to say the things I rushed through in yesterdays. You didn't get old with me, but I will grow old for both of us. I will love you in the empty chairs, in the echoes, in the shadows of routines we built, in the quiet mornings, in the deep nights, in every role I play that makes the world think I'm strong. And when the day comes that I see you again, I'll hand you this letter, and I'll say the words I never said in time. You were my home, and I've been wandering ever since. He folded the page, but no one moved. The air in the room had shifted, grown heavier, sacred. The kind of stillness that doesn't invite applause, it just invites reflection. He looked up once, not for attention, for presence. He wasn't performing, he wasn't acting, he wasn't delivering lines, he was surrendering, and they knew it. The audience knew it in the way they sat still, chins trembling, eyes red. There was no judgment in that room, only shared understanding, because every person there had lost something or someone, and somehow his letter had said what none of them could. This wasn't a Hollywood ending. It was something more honest, more human. And for a brief moment, Liam allowed himself to feel that he had said enough, that maybe the silence could soften now, that maybe grief, when spoken aloud, becomes less of a prison and more of a bridge. But then his voice returned, lower, rougher, as if something had clawed its way up from the deepest part of his soul. And what came next was not written on paper, because some truths are too raw to write. Some truths are only spoken when the world is finally quiet enough to hear them. He stepped away from the podium, eyes full but steady, and whispered, "But there's one more thing I never told her." And in that pause, in that breath, the room held itself still as Liam turned to the screen behind him and pressed a button on the remote in his hand. What appeared next on the screen made the entire room gasp, because it wasn't a photo, it was a video, one no one had ever seen before. The screen flickered softly, the room now cast in a dim blue glow. What appeared wasn't polished, edited, or planned. It was grainy, slightly shaky, footage taken on a phone or an old camcorder, the kind of video no one ever expects to see again. The kind you forget exists until it suddenly doesn't let you look away. There she was, Natasha, alive, laughing. The clip lasted no more than 20 seconds. She was seated at the edge of a couch, cradling a glass of wine, speaking in French through giggles as one of their boys tried to interrupt her with something funny off camera. Her eyes darted toward the lens, and she smiled with that familiar mischief, the kind of smile that didn't ask for attention, but always stole the room. Then, the screen went black again. No words, just silence. Liam stood still beside the image, not as a man finishing a performance, but as a man standing in the ruins of something sacred and unrepeatable. That video had never been shared, not online, not with friends, not even with his sons. It was buried deep in a forgotten folder, discovered by accident months earlier during a routine cleaning of an old hard drive. He hadn't even remembered recording it, But when he watched it again, when he saw her move, breathe, laugh, he realized something unbearable. He had started to forget, not the events, not the facts, but the motion, the sound of her voice when she wasn't reading lines or giving speeches, the way she moved through a room without effort, the specific way she touched her hair when she was tired. Those things, once vivid, had begun to fade at the edges, and that terrified him. Because if memory fades, what do we really carry forward? He cleared his throat once, not to speak, but to regain something inside that felt like it had come undone. And then, finally, he said the thing that had remained buried for years. Not in letters, not in video, not in eulogies. He said he had spent over a decade pretending to the world that he was okay, that he had accepted the loss, that he had found peace. But he hadn't. Because what he had never told anyone, what he had never even admitted to himself fully, was that he blamed himself. He blamed himself for not being there, for letting her go alone that morning, for not catching the second call sooner, for arriving at the hospital too late to hear her voice one last time. It didn't matter how many people told him otherwise. It didn't matter that it wasn't his fault. Grief doesn't work like that. It isn't logical. It chooses its target and clings to it. And in his case, that target had always been him. He carried it into every role, every interview, every appearance. He carried it in silence because he thought that's what strength looked like. But strength, he now understood, wasn't silence. It was surrender. It was confession. And that night, on that stage, in front of strangers who somehow understood him better than the world ever had, he surrendered. He told them about the nights he sat in hotel rooms with the lights off, speaking into the dark. He told them about the dreams that always ended too early, about the birthdays that passed like hollow echoes, about the irrational fear that his sons would forget her laugh, that he would forget the way she smelled in winter. He said all of it, because he knew if he didn't, the silence would never stop growing. And then, just as the weight of his own voice began to fall away, someone in the front row stood up, and then another and another. No applause, no clapping, just people rising from their seats, standing with him in stillness, as if to say, "We carry it too." He looked down at the letter in his hand, the one he had just read, and then placed it on the podium, but he wasn't finished. He reached into his pocket one final time and removed something small, something almost invisible in the stage lights. It was her wedding band. He had kept it all these years, not in a drawer, not in a safe, but in his jacket, every coat, every trip, every flight. It had been with him, and now, for the first time, he let it go. He walked slowly to the edge of the stage, knelt, and placed it at the base of her image, still faintly glowing on the screen behind him. It wasn't a gesture for the cameras. There were no cameras. It was a gesture for himself, a gesture for her, a release. And when he stood, something in his posture had changed, not lighter, but freer. He didn't speak again. He didn't need to. He walked off stage the same way he entered it, with dignity, with silence, with gravity. But this time, he wasn't alone in that silence. Backstage, as he prepared to leave the building quietly, a young man approached him. Early 30s, still wearing a name tag from the event. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't ask for a photo. He simply looked at Liam, eyes full, and said he hadn't told his wife, "I love you," in over a year. But tonight he would. Liam looked at him for a long moment. Then, without a word, he placed the letter, folded neatly, in the man's hands, not as a souvenir, as a reminder. And as he walked away into the dark hallway beyond the exit lights, the man stood there, holding the weight of those words, unsure of what to do with them, but knowing they had just changed something inside him. And that was enough. If this story touched you as deeply as it touched everyone in that room, leave a comment below and tell us which part hit you the hardest. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that true love doesn't die in absence. It lives on, in the words we leave behind, and in those we still find the courage to speak. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, subscribe to the channel. Every week, we share emotional and real stories to remind the world of one simple truth. Pain may silence us, but love always finds a way to speak. See you in the next one.